Today on Uncommon Sense, I am joined by Deacon Nathan Allen of the Archdiocese of St. Paul in Minneapolis, and we're going to discuss Hilaire Belloc and his great book, timely for this time of year, The Four Men. Stay tuned. Hello again, viewers and listeners. Welcome to another episode of Uncommon Sense. I am Joe Grabowski, the Vice President for Evangelization and Mission here at the Society, and I'm joined by Deacon Nathan Allen of the Archdiocese of St. Paul, Minneapolis. Hi, Deacon. Welcome to the program.
Hello, Joe. Glad to be here.
Well, why don't you just introduce yourself to the listeners and kind of why you're coming on the podcast today, where your background with Belloc comes from.
Thanks. I come to Belloc by way of Chesterton, actually. I find, when you have a friend, mm-hmm. and then you get to know your friend's friends, you understand your friend better. I had started reading Chesterton, and people would talk about the Chester Belloc, these two people that were almost inseparable. And so I started reading Belloc as well. And they really do complement each other in many ways. Chesterton has got that wonderful joy and, vibrancy. And Belloc is a little more militant. I like to joke that somebody once said that Chesterton and Belloc are very much alike, especially Belloc, but Belloc is a different sort of character than Chesterton, but they had a lot of similar ideas and similar things that they would write about. So that's how I came to Belloc, and then reading them both kind of in parallel together.
Yeah, before the program, we were chatting a little bit, and I said that there is that kind of a different kind of depth in Belloc. I think Chesterton is profound and mystical, but behind Chesterton at all times, there's this sort of rolling current of a deep, almost exuberant joy, whereas I think Belloc's a little more subdued and sadder, as you pointed out. I mean, he had tragedy in his life with the loss of his son and his wife, and he
lost two sons, one in World War I and one in World War II. And his wife when she was still quite young.
Yeah, and then kind of a lengthy decline too at the end there too. So I think it's just a different experience, and for me, just this time of year, for whatever reason, I always find myself returning to Belloc. One, because of the Four Men, which we'll get to speaking about, that's set around this time of year, but also he has that kind of mood when the days start getting darker and it's getting colder outside. There's something about Belloc that kind of resonates. So pivoting to the Four Men, ACS Books, and we'll have a link to this in the description. We publish a copy of the Four Men that you wrote.
I have a copy of it right here.
There you go. Your annotations and a little kind of introductory essay, but that kind of stemmed from a really interesting experience of the book. Why don't you tell us about that?
Well, we were, there are a couple of friends of mine who would read it almost every year, and again around this time of year, and thought, wouldn't it be fun to do the walk? Because the story of the Four Men is a walk across Sussex, mm-hmm. And then the idea for it came back in 2004 with I think it was the first Chesterton pilgrimage that we had done, and we met some people in England. I thought, this would be something that we could do. And a couple of years later, Ted Olson, who's on the board of the Chesterton Society, and I from America, and then two friends of ours from England, recreated the walk. In the book, it takes about 4 days. We did it in 6. little more manageable. It was kind of a 6-day pub crawl, but walking from the eastern end of Sussex to the western end of Sussex, about 100 miles, and just lovely country. We did it not quite the dates of the book, which takes place at the end of October into the beginning of November. We did it in September, but it was glorious weather and just a beautiful, beautiful experience.
That's fascinating. I take it you didn't you didn't mysteriously have a key to a cabin in the woods that you stayed at, like the travelers in the book do. So where did you stay along this walk? Did you just pop into inns or hotels, or?
We had prearranged where we were going to stay. In the eastern part of Sussex, it was just a fact that we wanted to start at the George, and is the name of the inn in Robertsbridge, right on the Kent border, and but the George was under renovation at that time. So what are we going to do, and we ended up actually having as our base of operations for the first half of the walk was in Linfield, just north of Hayward's Heath, and then we would take a cab out to where we had first to Robertsbridge, and then we walked halfway, and then came to Linfield by cab, and then took the cab back. So it's kind of, we always started from where we had left off.
Yeah. Well, that's funny. The making do reminds me of the other great walking itinerant book of Belloc, The Path to Rome, where he makes all those vows that he's not going to ride wheeled transportation and all the rest of it, and then one by one, as he says, breaks his vows. But
first stretches the rule.
Yeah.
I'm not going to take any wheeled thing. Well, I'm going to keep my feet on the ground at least. So he drags his feet as the cart is pulling him along.
Well, maybe remark upon that. I mean, Belloc, there's this kind of similarity or duality between, Chesterton, and he's often compared to C.S. Lewis, and then you have Belloc and Tolkien, who kind of were, I think, the more ornery of the fellows, and also the great walkers, right? They were both really, really fond of walking. Maybe because you have a good general background in Belloc, comment on just his prodigious kind of perambulatory adventures that he had.
Oh, it's clear that walking was an important thing for him, and his long-suffering wife. The Path to Rome we've touched on, where he decides to walk from Toul in eastern France to Rome in a direct line. If there's an Alp in the way, he goes over it, and that's a good month long. I mean, he leaves on Corpus Christi and arrives at Feast of St. Peter and St. Paul. So, it was a good month or so on the road. Sussex, in one of his books called The County of Sussex, he describes in one chapter a number of different ways to experience Sussex by walking. And the path that's in the Four Men is only one of them. And so he obviously walked, the South Downs. He walked, the path obviously in the Four Men. He walked from north to south, east to west. He walked all the time. His home in King's Land, near West Grinstead, is fairly close, a little bit to the west of the middle of the historic county. So he could go, within a day he could get to the sea, or he could go north to Surrey, or he could, a couple of days each way. And he would walk, 30 miles a day. So he would actually do it in 4 days, which we didn't.
Yeah. That combination, I think, of that sort of depth of human experience and of suffering in his life, and that kind of melancholic attitude, plus this experience of nature and the contemplative being alone for such stretches. I think, we mentioned before coming on the air, what a great poet he is. And I really think that lends to his being such a great poet. You see it in his poetry.
Right. And to say it's not any kind of casting shade on Chesterton at all. I mean, Lepanto, which we just celebrated a few days ago, and the Ballad of the White Horse. I mean, it's hard to beat those, but there is that sadness in Belloc. One of his great poems is called Hanaker Mill, and Hanaker is a hill just outside of Chichester, which is one of the larger towns in Sussex. And he used this image of the ruined windmill as a metaphor for the loss of agrarian life in England. He and Chesterton were both, clearly distributists, and loved the agrarian life. And it's got a sadness that Chesterton doesn't. We've talked about his joy. And there's a recording of Belloc as an old man singing Hanaker Mill. Mm-hmm. And you hear this old man, kind of the ruins of a great voice, and the sadness in it. But the poem runs. Sally is gone that was so kindly, Sally is gone from Hanaker Hill, and the briar grows ever since then so blindly, and ever since then the clapper is still, and the sweeps have fallen from Hanaker Mill. Hanaker Hill is in desolation, a ruin atop in a field unplowed, and spirits that call a fallen nation, spirits that loved her calling aloud, spirits abroad in a windy cloud, spirits that call and no one answers. Hanaker's down and England's done. Wind and thistle for pipe and dancers, and never a ploughman under the sun. Never a ploughman, never a one. As far as I know, the tune is by Belloc himself.
Yeah.
He would write the tunes. And in the Four Men, you'll see this too, a number of songs, some humorous, some more serious, with music that he himself wrote.
Yeah, it's neat to see his little musical notations throughout. If you get I have a first edition, and I can attest that they're all right there, and they're very charming. And also the illustrations too. He was a really deft draftsman with pen and ink and pencil. He could draw these landscape images and things like that.
That's part of, and he would do that just with his walks. He would stop and sketch something, and he mentions that quite a bit in The Path to Rome. But there was, he made his way across the North American continent to woo his wife. His wife, Elodie, was from California. And he would draw along the way, and when he was run out of money, he would sell drawings along the way. So it had a practical purpose as well as artistic for him. But yeah.
Well, speaking of this particular book, the Four Men, maybe we can get into that a little more in depth, and just especially again this time of year, it's timely. But yeah, what are your broad thoughts on what commends it to read, especially at this time of year? Maybe particularly commends it to men to read. Yeah.
It is I have been told by women that it's a very male book.
Yeah.
It is, well, first of all, the dramatic date of the book is October 29th through November 2nd. And each of the chapters is a day. And there are varying lengths because the first day begins in the evening of that day. And, But we've talked about how the story's basic overview is this walk across Sussex, and there are four men who meet each other at kind of at random, and decide that they're going to walk across Sussex together and share tall tales and drinking songs and, along the way. It has been speculated that, and we represent this in the cover of our edition, with these four men sitting around the table. I can show that to your viewers. That these are based on four different portraits of Belloc himself at different stages in his life, because the four men in the story are really aspects of Belloc's personality. Mm-hmm. Myself is the main character who kind of holds everything together, but you have Grizzlebeard the historian, and Belloc was a historian. He wrote a number of biographies. And then you have the sailor, and Belloc, one of his great books is called The Cruise of the Nona. He had a little sailboat that he was quite an expert salesman, and sailor, a man who sailed, not a salesman, not like Willie Lumen, and then also we've talked about his poetry, and so these four men in the story each are aspects really of Belloc's personality and the love of his county. So it's a good, easy read. It's not terribly long. Each day, it's kind of episodic, so you can read it and put it down, and it's full of things that make you laugh out loud, and then also just a deep sense of reflection on mortality, on eternal things. It's just a deeply profound book. And C.S. Lewis, we'd mentioned him, would talk about how you never have read a book until you've reread it. Mm-hmm. I read this book almost every year. Mm-hmm. I've read it over and over again, and each time it goes deeper. So that's I strongly encourage people to take a look at it, especially since your viewers and hearers are love Chesterton. And as I'd said at the outset, you know your friends better when you know your friends' friends.
That's right.
And Belloc and Chesterton were very close friends.
Yeah, and Belloc was hugely influential. Joseph Pearce likes to point this out, that Belloc sort of has this huge part in kind of leading Chesterton, and then sort of in the Jedi way, the apprentice becomes the master sort of in some ways, because Belloc would then say, like, he admired Chesterton's holiness, and Chesterton's sort of becomes a model in some ways for Belloc. So they have this great mutual reinforcement and camaraderie in the faith, because you're reading, this book, he wrote it, correct me if I'm wrong, in 1911, right? Right. The events of the book take place in, I think it's 1902, but it's 1911. So early, before Chesterton, over a decade before Chesterton becomes Catholic, and really as the ideas for distributism are beginning to percolate and take hold of them, and you see the beating heart of it, this love of one's native land, one's local place, and having a local place, and always, though, with Belloc, tinged with that kind of melancholy of a sense that it's slipping away, because, right, that's the whole raison d'etre for this walk that he takes. I want to see this land before I die, or before it goes away, before it perishes, right? Yeah.
And then there's also that deeply Christian sense that even though we are, he very much rooted to where we are from, especially if we're someone like Belloc, who's always lived in Sussex, except when he was, 2 years old. His father was French and his mother was English, and she was widowed quite young. He was about 2 years old when he came back to England, and so he really, although he's got a French name, he's distinctly an English writer. But, very much this love of one's native place, but also that Christian sense that here we have no lasting city.
Yeah.
We are always strangers and sojourners on the land. And so even though at the beginning of the Four Men, as the characters are meeting each other, they talk about going to the place we know, meaning where they're from in the western part of Sussex. There really is a sense that even that isn't home.
Mm-hmm.
And each of the stories kind of build and reflect on that. There's, a point where they're talking about lost loves or lost first loves, and Grizzlebeard tells the story, and it's clear, that nothing is lasting in this world.
Yeah.
But yeah, the introduction or the preface that Belloc himself gives is really where he stresses that, where he talks about that in my county, he begins, it has been proved in life that every man that though his loves are human and therefore changeable, yet in proportion as he attaches them to things unchangeable, so they mature and broaden. Mm-hmm. And the county is more unchangeable than human beings. And so it goes more mature, more broad, but even then he knows that it's passing away. And so he concludes by, saying, but before that day comes, Sussex, may your earth cover me, and may some loud-voiced priest from Arundel or Grinstead or Crawley or Storrington, but best of all from home, have sung Do mi fa sol above my bones. Do mi fa sol, the first four notes of the In Paradisum, which is sung when the casket is being taken from the church in a Catholic funeral.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a lovely atmospheric book too. It's there's this moment where they're in they're staying at the cabin, and myself goes outside, and he is just looking up at the stars, and there's sort of the scene of or he tells a story of the fairy mass.
Right.
It's been a while since I read it and remember, but it creates these atmospheres that will just linger with you, and it's so English. I don't know how else to describe it. It's deeply an English book. It feels as much of that place as Robin Hood or the Tales of Arthur. It's just really something else.
And one of the real thing that made me to want to do this annotated edition was every time I would read it, I would spot something new. Mm-hmm. And I thought, I would love to explain how, like people to get the same experience I do as I read this book, because the image in my head was of Belloc as this famous guest at your dinner party, and has got all the anecdotes and everybody laughs at and witticisms and everything, but there are so many things that each person doesn't get. Mm-hmm. And you get something, and there's suddenly a connection. You get the allusion to the Aeneid or whatever. And I wanted to share that experience with other people. And so as I would go through it, and I would collect notes on the things that he would just put in there, and some of the things that if you don't know what he's referring to, will completely pass by without even noting that there's something here to look at. I'm thinking in particular, one of my favorite songs in the book is the Sailor's Carol. Where, I might as well sing it, right?
Sure, why not? That's what we do.
Noel, 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 a Catholic tale have I to tell, and a Christian song have I to sing, while all the bells in Arundel ring. I pray good beef and I pray good beer, this holy night of all the year. But I pray detestable drink for them that give no honor to Bethlehem. May all good fellows that here agree drink audit ale in heaven with me, and may all my enemies go to hell. Noel, 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 Noel. May all my enemies go to hell. Noel, Noel. And of course Grizzlebeard says, the song is blasphemous. We should forgive our enemies. And the sailor responds, well, and so I do. The song's about those who don't forgive me. But even in that, humorous song, there's this line that if you don't know what it's referring to, you'll miss it. And I was just reading it, audit ale. Yeah. And I'm thinking, what is audit ale? I love beer. I want audit ale. And I couldn't find anything at all, except as you research it, you realize, and I'm a recovering lawyer, so I remember in law school, we would talk about peppercorn consideration and so forth in contract law. In the Middle Ages, your whole society is structured feudally, based upon your relationship with your lord. And so your rents for your farm would not necessarily have any relation whatsoever to the economic value of the land. It would be a token rent. And so your rent for your farm might be a rose at midsummer. And then so these periodic audits were held 4 times a year, and depending on when your terms of your lease were up, that would be the audit you would appear at. And they roughly turned on the turnings of the seasons. So you had Lady Day on March 25th. You had the birth of St. John the Baptist in June. You had Michaelmas, at the end of September, and then you had Christmas. And so then you would come and present at your audit your 3 peppercorns or your, or your rose or whatever your rent was, and then you would enter into the feast. And the audit ale was a seasonal beer that was brewed for the feast. And so in this one throwaway line in a humorous song, Belloc gives us an image of our own judgment day, when every knee shall bow and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. Just as at your audit, you're acknowledging this is my Lord, my landlord, in the feudal system. And then you enter into the joy of your Lord, which is the feast. So the book is full of things like that. And that's and because when I started spotting those things, I thought, I need to share this. And that was kind of the germ for doing the annotation, to make that available to people,
Well, with mention of the feast, I think that's a good segue into the kind of last thing I wanted to touch on today, which is just this idea that I know I participate in, but the original, the original recipe is what you all do out there in the Twin Cities, which is the 4-men feast. So maybe describe that for the viewers.
Ted Olson, who was one of the 4 of us who walked across Sussex, we started doing this, I forget how many years ago now it is. I mean, it's got to be close to 30 years now. It was his idea. I just, I was part of it from the beginning. Because at the end of the book, the last night before they separate, the 4 men have a feast. And it's eggs and bacon, of course, English bacon, not the belly bacon that we in North America are so familiar with. But so it's a shoulder cut, so a lot less fat, are cooked together in a kind of a single commonality, and then bread and cheese, and he makes something in the 4 men about it's just cheese, but to help our viewers understand, it's more like a white cheddar of some sort, that kind of South England cheese, and then beer and wine, whatever. And so we thought, we'll do this. We got these 4 main ingredients. We've got eggs, bacon, beer, bread, cheese, and then whatever we want to drink. And so we've just started doing that, and it's kind of grown. I know some people will object to this, but we keep it men, because there's something about male companionship that the dynamic, it's not that it's bad, but the dynamic changes when you start when you get away from that, and then we have this kind of ritual menu, but then we also sing Belloc songs, do Belloc readings, and generally enjoy each other's company. And we've been doing that for, like I say, pretty close to 30 years now. And then a few years ago, actually, we decided to launch a parallel feast in June for the Path to Rome, right around St. Peter and St. Paul. And now I'm threatening that we need to do a cruise of the Nona sometime in spring, so that we can have 3 times during the... So I'll have to read the Cruise of the Nona again and see if there's a ritual menu we can co-opt for that. But it's just a great time for, a lot of the men at the Four Men Feast have read the book and love the book. A lot of them, this is their first real introduction to it. But it's an opportunity to spread the word and get people perhaps reading or hearing Belloc as we're doing readings from him. Some of his humorous poems, especially the Bad Child's Bestiary and the cautionary tales for children, or some of his epigrams, like one of his went, "When I am gone, may it be said, his sins were scarlet, but his books were red."
Yeah. Well, it is a great tradition, and we kind of co-opted it here locally. There were others already that I attended. I never went to Ted's, actually, but I had gone to one that was being held down in Springfield when I lived out in Wisconsin, going to Marquette. And then when I came back to Philly, we did one on a friend's deck, very much the same kind of order of the day. But as we've grown over the years and having it as an annual occasion, it's grown out a little bit. It's a little more, we added traditions, and it's local. So it participates in localism that way. But anyone interested, I even built this kind of website where I take inquiries, and it's funny. I do get inquiries from men all over the country. They stumble upon it, maybe searching for the book, and they're like, "Oh, I want to do this. Can we do this?" I'm like, "It's not, Ted and he didn't mind that I kind of started doing one, and I don't think that it's protected IP. It's just sort of, this is a great way to get men together, particularly as you mentioned, and a great opportunity for them to reflect on those essential things that are in the book at the right time of year. It does sort of function as a nice memento mori, entering the month of the dead, and also remembering those gone before us in that month. So
there's very early on in the book, there's a poem called The Threnody for the Departing Year. And of course, you have to look up what is a threnody. Well, a threnody is a funeral poem. And it's an interesting, funny thing that the sailor, or the poet, is writing the poem, and it's got a really complicated rhyme and meter, and it's not a good poem. And so the sailor chucks in a couple of lines that break the whole thing, and then the poet sums it up, weaving in something that the sailor had introduced in his couple of lines, and comes up with 7 of really the most gorgeous lines I think Belloc ever wrote in a poem, where he says, the winter snow shall reverently fall on our beloved lands, as on Marana dead a winding sheet was laid to hide the smallness of her hands and her lips her virginal white feet. I guess a sense of death, but holiness and innocence and everything, because Marana, was a virgin martyr from Lebanon.
Yeah. Wow.
So he really, that the whole notion that a man is really not, and he mentions this in his preface, a man is more himself when he's part of a company.
Mm.
Again, to friends, you know your friends better if you know your friends' friends. Yeah. And so in this poem, the poet can't write a good poem until he's interrupted by the sailor, and then he can write the poem. So it's about companionship, it's about death, it's about eternal things. It's just a glorious book with so many things to recommend it.
Well, indeed, and I'll put in that plug. You can get a copy of the annotated version of this book that Deacon Allen so wonderfully annotated on our website. We'll put the link in the description, probably a card somewhere up here in the video so that you can click on that. And yeah, I do commend it, and it's great to be familiar with Belloc, whether you're a man or a woman, but especially for you men out there watching, do give this one a try, and maybe consider hosting a little gathering and introducing others to it and having your own 4-men feast.
There are a couple of pages at the end of the book where the founder of the Springfield Feast gives kind of a couple of pages of how to do it, what the menu should be. So.
Exactly. Yeah, it's relatively easy to put on, and as I say, make it your own. I wouldn't change the menu. There are some essentials that I think make it what it is, of course, but in terms of which poetry you pull out and what kind of things you're going to read and share together, that's kind of what makes it neat and individualistic, because it's about the men who are there at the feast who come together and what's on their minds, and that's what makes it the great conviviality that it is. Mm-hmm. Well, Deacon, thank you so much for coming on the show, and I'm sure that you've given our listeners and viewers a lot to think about, and maybe some things to read.
All right. Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, and to all of you viewers and listeners, thank you for tuning in again. Please do like this video, share it with your friends, hit the subscribe button so you always know when new content's coming out on our channel here. We are trying to grow our audience, so all of those things help us do that. Leave us a comment down below if there's particular things that you want us to cover on the podcast in the future, what you thought about this episode, if you've read The 4-Men, what you think of it. All these things help YouTube recognize that people value this content, and it shares it to more and more people. Because we do want to reach more people, because as we know, Chesterton is always better with friends. Until next time, God bless.